Welcome to Resolving Reality. My name is Emmett, the creator of the resolvingreality.com website and host of this podcast, Resolving Reality Radio. Resolving Reality is an independent Irish media platform that examines national and global issues, featuring opinions and topics not covered in the mainstream media, including the alternative, the politically incorrect, the undiscovered and the ignored. Check out the website for all our social media links and platforms, which you can find in the footer on each page. Follow us on Twitter at ResolvingOr, both capital Rs. Find us on YouTube, where you can listen to the podcasts, but also watch our video content. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. We are on Mixcloud, but if you prefer to listen to the podcast in higher quality WAV audio, click on the SoundCloud icon to visit the Resolving Reality SoundCloud profile, where you can download the episodes in high quality as well. Resolving Reality Radio is now on Stitcher and iTunes, plus check out our BitChute profile and you will find all those links right there on the website resolvingreality.com. This is Resolving Reality Radio. In these fast-changing and psychotic times, there is a wave of monoculturalism that is now spreading across the civilized world. A wave of cultural transformation that seeks to wash away the uniqueness of various peoples and the lands in which they live. Ireland and Irish culture, having been progressively eroded over the centuries, is now almost completely erased in the name of progress and so-called progressivism. Irish culture, along with any remaining Irish sovereignty, is disappearing thanks to globalism and the invasion, once again, of foreign ideologies. Now, more than ever, it's important to remind ourselves of Ireland's incredible culture, its unique history, its eternal beauty, and the ancient origins that are the foundations of its story. My guest for this subject is none other than Michael Tsarion, who is a prolific author and public speaker and a veteran of the truth and so-called alternative research community. His many books cover such topics as occult and ancient history, mythology, philosophy, astrotheology, German idealism, the female psyche, plus his acclaimed book Atlantis, Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation, and The Irish Origins of Civilization, Volumes 1 and 2. To find out more about Michael and his vast body of work and the subjects we cover in this interview, visit michaeltsarion.com and irishoriginsofcivilization.com. Hello, Michael, and welcome to Resolving Reality Radio.
Thank you, Emmett. It's lovely to be on. Nice to be invited.
Brilliant. It's great to have you here. And in today's show, we're going to be discussing a favourite subject of mine. I'm not an expert in it, but very interested in it, which is Irish mythology and ancient history and the kind of culture of Ireland, pretty much, and where it came from. And, I've been familiar with your work over the years, and it's kind of been a while since I've been paying attention to the material. So I've had a little crash course recently. I'm a little bit rusty, but I suppose it's not a bad thing because people who are listening who are new to the material will get a nice little foundation, and it'll be a nice revision course for me as well. So will we start off with just some of the basics again for people who are new to this sort of thing? And I suppose we could probably go in chronological order and start with the official end of things, because that's what people normally rely on. So like how far back does the official story or history go in Ireland, Michael, and kind of what are the sources? Are they academic and are writers based in Ireland or from elsewhere?
Well, academic is part of the problem, right? The thing is controlled. My research has shown me that the Jesuit control and other control, British government, British Crown, what we're dealing with is so garbled. And the dates, as you very well start off with, are key to this because, and my research is not the last word on it as well. I've even recently had to update that. But let's take the founding of Rome, right? It's about 700 BC. And some people might think that's very young when they hear that being said, and others might think, oh, that's very ancient. But it really isn't. So around 6 to 700 BC, a lot of activity was happening in Ireland. And normally, officially, academically, that is when, if you have to go back to a mythological cycle, right? So a prehistoric Ireland begins about then officially. And I went along with that for the best part of, 20, 30 years, because where's the evidence to say earlier. There's mythological evidence to say a lot earlier, but it's mythological. It talks about things that are not accepted academically, like earth changes, cataclysmic events, very mythological type beings, for instance, like the Fomori or even the Tuatha De Danann afterwards, that kind of thing. There's no way that that's going to be academically accepted. So you have to already break the consensus, you see? So again, back to the main point, that normally, officially, you're going to see it start, and they'll concede, right? And by God, you even have to pull teeth for that. But they'll concede that about 500, 600 BC things are happening. Now, you and I know that that's nonsense. Anyone who's been to Newgrange, anybody who's been to the various sites like Navan, Ardmacha, right? I don't care what it is, right? Carrowkeel. These are thousands of years old, right? At least 5,000. Some of them even think 5,000 BC, not 5,000 years from where we are, but 5,000 years even BC. And that already nullifies, the academic approach, as it does if you're dealing with Mesoamerica or anywhere else. So it's the maverick community, people that are my mentors, and then, the Commons Beaumonts of the world and the Ignatius Donnellys and that kind of people, Anna Wilkes, who have really got the real handle on this. And then recently, Ralph Ellis's work comes to bear, of course, here. His discoveries impact what we know about Ireland. So to answer your question, is that my feeling now is that the thing starts about 1,000 years prior to that. And then to meet people halfway, to be generous, I'd say, let's go 500 years back from 500 BC to 1,000 BC. And this would be only maybe 300-400 years after the demise of Akhenaten, who plays a big role in my life. You see the Egyptian connection. And then I think his descendants, and this would involve several people, not his daughter is probably the most important one when really comes down to it, right? But if we pull back from the canvas a bit from her, then there's others intermediaries. There's Tutankhamun, there's the Pharaoh Aya. And these people have Irish connections, okay? So we have to go back then. And then the only thing to add to that is that if you really want to go back, if you really want to do something that makes the academic world shake to its core, then you have to go back to the first dynasty of Egypt, to King Menes, and his tomb, his burial site is in County Tyrone. Now you're dealing with even thousands of years before the dates we've just been speaking of. So the thing just boils over at that point, and the academics are running in all directions. And yet in County Tyrone, at a place called Knockmany, which everybody knows is the hill of Manes, we're talking about the first pharaoh of the first dynasty. We're way back 4,000 years BC in terms of even Egyptian mythology. And these are strong connections, but they've been suppressed by this the elite and the establishment authors. And yet, if you know where to go, like I do, you'll find academics who will concede every point I'm making. People like Lorraine Evans, who wrote the book Kingdom of the Ark, and people of that ilk. There are people who admit this, but they're hard to find. And, my work is largely based on locating this evidence from academic sources, that are credible sources, E.A. Wallace Budge and so many other people we could mention.
So, yeah, and the key to it, like you said, is with stuff of this nature, you really need to go off-road, to try to get to the bottom of things straight away. And, so they're only going back a few thousand years. And even, when we're looking at the sites that you mentioned, they're the obvious kind of giveaways, like when you're looking at Newgrange, we've all been there myself recently. And it doesn't take much to kind of immediately it should be obvious and make people think straight away that the official story isn't quite cutting it here.
It's quite right. I mean, there's nothing that we're saying that's spurious at all. If you go to these sites and the astronomical, the geomantic precision, they don't even know how to build a corbel structure. In Newgrange is a ceiling that nobody on earth can build. Just like they can't build a sarcophagus that they find in Saqqara or even the King's Coffer and the Great Pyramid. Well, look, forget Egypt. Forget the flicking Sumerians. Let's just deal with Ireland, what's on our doorstep, and then spill over into, features that you see in Wales and other parts of England. Avebury, Stonehenge. There's thoughts that even some of the stones in Stonehenge could actually come from County Kildare in Ireland. What the hell is going on? There's enough mystery. But the thing is, a lot of that mystery is being extrapolated by the people that I deal with. My whole Irish Origins work was just simply started off as a dedication to Commons Beaumont, right? Who was, a great mentor of mine, an Englishman who went to every headland and every conceivable site in the British. Who's ever heard of this guy? These Johnny-come-latelys in today's world, Random House is printing their, these people are taking the credit. There's not a thing that they're iterating that hasn't already been iterated by major people in the past, like Commons Beaumont, Conor McDorry, Ignatius Donnelly, and Anna Wilkes, and a bevy of other great people. They're just reiterating their stuff, but they've airbrushed the name of these greats out. My job is to go back as a purist and resurrect the work of a Conor McDorry or Emmanuel Velikovsky, because it's, to me, dreadful and obnoxious that their names are forgotten. So there's many elements to my work. It's not just the pure history or pushing the boundaries and being, controversial and being a maverick, and that's all part of it, but it's a minor part of it. The basic motive of my work in this regard, what we're talking about, and in every other field that I deal with, is to make sure that graves are not left unattended, because great minds broke the consensus in the 1800s and the 1900s to bring forth this information. What are we going to do? Just forget about it and wait till some Johnny-come-lately, packages it and it's in Waterstone's frickin' window, and then it's all right. Then you can accept it, or it's on Channel 4 or whatever. No, that's not satisfactory. I'm glad for that. I'm glad that those productions exist. I'm dead glad those books exist. But by no means should somebody think that that's where it started in the 1980s with the Da Vinci, the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, or whatever else you've got in the 90s. This study goes right back to the turn of the century. And some of the finest work was done then. And I never lose sight of that. You see, whether it's to do with ley lines or the history of Ireland or the history of the church and the suppression and all the rest of it. There's such a story to be told here. And then maybe the other motive for me was the fact that I was incensed the more I read from a Geoffrey Keating, some of the ancient books of Ireland, the Annals of Ireland, the ancient chronicles of Scotland. I started to become aware then that we've got another problem, and that is that not only are the greats being suppressed, but there's a story here of desecration. And that in almost every book I've read, even if it happens to be on the Druids or the history of Ireland, the destruction of the Druidic culture is a footnote in almost all the books. Not all, but books that people would never have heard of. Maybe it's done a little bit better with, but these are out of print books, so I'm not counting those. I'm counting about books that you could get from a wide variety of Celtic scholars and well-meaning Christian scholars even. And, oh my God, all over the world we're talking about the Native American Indian destruction this, and the conquistadors and the Maya and the Aztecs that, right? And the destruction of these people over here and over there. Well, hold on. Why is the destruction of the Druids a bloody footnote? Nothing more than that in most books. A paragraph is what you get in some of the finest books on this subject. And I just went, this is unbelievable. They're wailing and crying about, the spotted owl or whatever, and this monumental massacre that affected not just the time that it happened, but the rest of the fate of the West. The whole Western world's, traditions and history is affected by the destruction of the servants of truth and the servants of light. And all the sorcery we know today, both politically and historically and institutionally and educationally, all of these obscenities arise out of the destruction of this class of the servants of truth. And that's a footnote in most people's book, a genocide of unimaginable proportions, and you're wondering about some Timbuktu, a catastrophe that took place, and not this. That's unacceptable to me. So my Irish blood did really get up at that. And I said, no way am I going to allow that.
So it's not just a question that there was omissions or mistakes made. This is a deliberate kind of an occulting of history, I suppose, which we can expand on more when we get into the Druids for sure. And I mean, you made the point there that you need to go off road and to kind of go into the mythology to get to the bottom of things and try to piece things together from that. Or so I mean, how far back does the mythology go? And I mean, how important is it to understand the history of Ireland?
Well, even officially, it goes back to what they call the flood. They do think of it as a mythological cycle, so none of the academics are actually accepting that any of this happened. But I believe, you see, the key to what I do, right? People open a book of mine or whatever, or go to the website, they're never going to make any progress unless they understand one fact. I accept the myths and legends of the whole world as fact, not in a stupid way, but in a rational way. So this is already going to distinguish you from those people who really make a categorical difference between what we call fact and what we call mythology. To me, the mythology is fact, and it actually contains more fact than we can even imagine. So when the ancient, or even when the academics are talking about the flood in this more sort of generic and general way, I'm looking at that being the deluge, just as Comins Beaumont instructed people, and just like Ignatius Donnelly, that's why I mentioned those names earlier, it's very important to do so, because they factor in Atlantis. They factor in the destruction of the old world, the cataclysm that then sent people to Britain, Britain being a remnant, you see. And this has impact then on what Plato said, because in Plato you don't get that he's talking about the Northwest, but actual hands-on testing, hands-on geology, and all of this other speculation, even the astronomical aspect, maybe we can touch on that later, definitely leads us not to places speculated by Plato, but further up, past the Pillars of Hercules, which actually is a giant's causeway, and Fingal's Cave over in Scotland. The Pillars of Hercules are not to be found in the Mediterranean. They're not part of Gibraltar or whatever. They are the famous, well-known to ship people at the time. Ancient mariners knew exactly where the Pillars of Hercules were, because the Hercules in Celtic mythology is Oma or Ogma, O-G-M-A, god of strength. And his pillars, later reprised in the Finn McCool story, this is how mythologies happen, are the Pillars of Hercules, are the, as I said, the Giant's Causeway. So the actual Atlantis is in that direction. Well, look, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out where it was. It's part of the Northern Hemisphere, and that includes England and Ireland, Scandinavia, and even possibly Greenland, Iceland, and part of the Arctic. And as a matter of fact, geology accepts that there is a sunken continent called Appalachia right there. That there is indeed not only just devastated forests going on for thousands upon thousands of miles. I write about all of this in the Atlantis book and also in the Irish Origins, and that there is indeed remnants of a culture. And then about a few years ago, now we're not talking many years ago, it couldn't be more than 10 years ago, when the National Geographic did a deep survey of all of the coastlands of Britain, they confirm cataclysm, not uniformitarianism. So all the uniformitarianism, all the classic geology was completely dashed. I have the facts of this in various places and on the Irish Origins website. And yet that again was airbrushed. We never saw the consequences of that. We never saw the follow-up of that extremely expensive National Geographic survey of the coastlines of England, and Comins Beaumont was absolutely validated. That all the shelves that you can't see because the water covers it, but they did the sonar. They've done this with a new technology, and they discovered that the shelves show absolute 100% evidence of cataclysm, not a slow, gradual, uniformitarian, motion as your Lyells and your Gizes and your various and your Geekies and all of these original cheating, lying academics, right, who knew what was going on but couldn't, for the sake of their careers, admit. Whether it came to Nosophilia or it came to the movement and the strange behavior of animals or these woolly mammoths, all the things that one has to get into, right? All the strangeness of it. But getting back to your point, ancient mythology had already talked all about it. Facts are catching up in the 20th and 21st century. My God, ancient prehistoric cultures already told you what was what. But it was shunted aside, laughed off as fairy folk tale and mythology, and we lost such a canon of knowledge by that. And we're still reeling from the shock. We're miles behind where we should be because of the negation and the dismissal, you see, of fairy folk, what was laughingly called fairy folk tale. And Ireland's culture is rich in it, one of the richest, and yet we've let it rot to our own bloody detriment.
It's great how if you have for those who have the open-mindedness to go and look into this stuff, there's a whole treasure trove of knowledge there to be had, if you want to go and study into it. And what kind of, well, just a couple of things for you, what kind of time period are we talking about with Atlantis? And also, what are the traces of the Atlantis story in Irish mythology?
That's a great question. It's key because there's many cataclysms. So when you start opening the door of cataclysm, you immediately have to do exactly as you asked, which is date things, because there's many cataclysms. So the Storegga tsunami, which split Norway and Sweden and created the fjords and probably cut them off from islands that were connected to Scotland, that's one cataclysm. Then you have the Bronze Age famine that devastated Ireland about 8,000 BC. The Storegga tsunami was about 4,000 BC. And the top archaeologists know, that Storegga tsunami, Storegga just means large in Swedish or Norwegian, right? The big tsunami that not only created the fjords, but it sunk a land bridge. So I'm absolutely correct when I talk about a land bridge. It's been seen from satellite now that existed between the remote Orkneys and all of these remote islands, the Isle of Lewis, all of it. Those were not islands at one time. You see, our whole picture of Britain and its headlands and its coastlines is utterly different than it was just a few thousand years ago. Then you have the Bronze Age famine, then you have this and that and the other. But these to me are what you would call follow-on effects. They're not original cataclysms. The one that's the biggie, right? The one that sank Atlantis, or if you want to get into that, I think that happened around 13,500 years ago. And that many of the other then subsequent disasters, of which there were many, right, are sort of after effects. The Earth has been so damaged, so traumatized, that there's a sequence. Every 3,000 years or so, there's something else going on. But the big one, the one that really matters for tradition, for culture, for Western civilization, I think happened about 13,500 years ago. And I go into that first in the Atlantis book, and then I pick a story up, in the Irish origins, and try to make the case then that that's where it starts. Atlantis is destroyed, you see, or buried beneath the waves, whichever way you want to look at it. And then, just like the Mayan records say about Aztlan, then there's a period of regrouping, regalvanizing culture on the lands that sort of we know today. What this does, if you take it to its ultimate extreme, is it radically changes what we know even about ice ages. So one of the longest, because what we're talking about now can account for that. It can be an alternative account of the ice age in terms of cataclysm, not the uniformitarian description of it that most school kids know. So there's that angle people can come at, and that's what Richard Milton, people go to my work, they will find them well sourced with people that they can look up. There's a whole library of books on the Irish origins of civilization website, and one of the books mentioned there is called Shattering the Myths of Darwinism, by a man who, though doesn't talk about Atlantis necessarily, he's one man, Richard Milton, Shattering the Myths of Darwinism, you see, who's dealt in this alternative view. Then there's Allen and Dallaire, two top professors from Oxford and Cambridge. They don't come any higher than that. I've got MIT guys, CIT guys from America who've looked into this and found that the story as officially given is absolute bogus nonsense, right? So eminent people. Doesn't mean that you have to believe it on faith just because, they're eminent people, but at least I've laid out the information so that people can judge for themselves. And you'll find an incredibly different story there. But as I keep on saying, then the story that you find there in these experts of the modern age, it's confirmed by what the mythologies already said about Ireland and Avalon and Lyonesse and many other islands that used to be in existence but are no more, you see.
And is there a connection between, the story of Tír na Nóg, which is something that, I grew up hearing, and I'm sure a lot of people hear that story, talking about the land of youth, and I mean, talking about, I think, down in where the Fianna used to hang around, down in County Clare, I think, or Kerry, and about stories of them travelling under the sea to Atlantis. Is there any connection between those?
Yeah, because these islands, the blessed islands, the fortunate islands, and then these magical islands, all are based in truth. These were islands that were the centers of different cults, right? Because in the Atlantean period, and that's a broad period, we had a different kind of world. It's also, I've spoken about it in my presentations on what's known as the Arctic homeland. This is another tie-in, which again is about Northwestern Aryan Hyperborean culture. And there wasn't one or two islands, there was many. They're like an archipelago effect. And each of these archipelagos, which is the real Atlantis wasn't one location, it was an Atlantean culture. And part of that was these different divided lands on which different grades of Druid, let's just put it as simply as possible, existed with their schools. Something that the Christian monks tried to parody later on and didn't quite get it right, but it's an echo of what was before, right? Like Iona and Columba and all of these different, the Christian monks were trying to parody it. But the original premise was that not only was the Druidic order divided in and of itself, with the Archdruid, the Druids, the Bards, the Ovates, and the Minstrels, something on a horizontal level also was taking place where they had different schools. Like the Bards would have a separate set of islands to teach whatever it was that they taught, herbalism, plants, astronomy, you name it. They section things off. It's where our house system comes from when we're dealing with universities and colleges. They're often striated and divided into threes. And so we still preserve a great deal of this. In fact, that's a whole sub-study in itself. I wrote 2 volumes on that called The Trees of Life. And those 2 volumes go into the unbelievable proofs of everything we're saying now, but in symbolism. civic symbolism, educational symbolism, royal symbolism, you name it, what symbolism. All the Druidic motifs are right there in plain view. Masonic symbolism, of course, one must always mention that. So yeah, these islands definitely existed. They came down through the minstrel tradition and then got all colorful. And then kids hear it, and we grew up listening to those colorful tales. But those are now doctored by the minstrel. The minstrels are actually connected to the Druids, but their job was to condense and to popularize high esoteric matters. It's where the zodiac comes from, as we know it, with all the animal figures, to make it easy for people to understand, and for farming type level people to get it, almanac level. But behind that is a greater, deeper secrets about, like the Arctic homeland, like the real truth about the zodiac, the movement of the sun, many esoteric things that, maybe the school of Pythagoras. There's a tremendous culture in the pre-Diluvian or pre-flood period. And so what we hear about Ocean and Finn and Lu and all the rest of it, and Excalibur, right? Arthur's Excalibur is based on a prototype, the Irish prototype of the sword of King Nada. So there's a lot that one can extrapolate. Even the suits of the tarot date from this extremely primordial period. And many, many other myths. David and Goliath was cut and pasted right out of Irish myth. It's got nothing to do with anything that happened in the Middle East. It's got to do with Lu and Baelor. And you don't even have to see. The interesting thing is when somebody gets into this sincerely with an unbiased mind, there isn't much facade to peel off, Emmett, as you well know by looking at it yourself. There is a facade you have to peel off, but it's not very deep in many cases. And so there's a lot there that you can find in the Bible, and there's a lot there that you can find in other myths and legends that are actually based, even as far away as India, but they're actually based on something that happened here in the West.
This is kind of where we're getting to the heart of it now, the significance of all of this and the influence that Irish culture had and how that's kind of been hidden. And I know I'm kind of skipping a lot here. I know we had the cataclysm and all that, and that's been covered so much elsewhere. Maybe we could just jump straight into the Druids then, and because I think you brought it up earlier, and it's quite key. And I know a little bit about this group. I know they are highly influential, and your work kind of uncovers that quite a lot. But if we just start with the basics again, for someone who hasn't heard your material before, like, who are the Druids, and like, how can we define them as a group?
Well, I think one of the things that I bring to bear is that they were universal. The very word Ireland comes from Aria land. And right there, you immediately now have to expand beyond the shores of, say, Britain, because the Aria are worldwide, and that's accepted even by skeptics. So as soon as you start talking Druids as High Aria, you now cannot confine their schools and their colleges to Britain. So automatically, any concept of, Michael's a racist, Michael's a xenophobe, Michael's, an Aryan, talking about Aryans and all that, it just goes out the window, because now we're talking high classic traditions. The Aryavarta in northern India and Pakistan, right? The Arya are found in Bulgaria, Romania, the steppes of Russia, right? There's not a place where they're not found under one name or another, right? So this group now is linked, the key link, that the one I explore the most, it's not the only link, as I say, but the one that is most intriguing to me is a connection with Egypt. So the one thing that people can expand their knowledge of the Druids is that what we call the Amonist tradition, which is a long tradition going back, as I say, to King Menes, the worship of Amun-Ra is Irish, or Irish, or Aryan if you prefer. So the Druids of the West, Northwest, are deeply connected in symbolism and in other fields to the Egyptian Amonists, and may even have founded what we call the Nile civilization. So that's unpacked in 700 pages, in the book, because you can't just say things like that without having at least some thesis, But the thesis is immensely credible, and therefore I hope that my readers get into it at some point. So that's one thing that can be said, is that the Druids are an international priesthood. Then more significantly, a priesthood of what? Right? Well, they were solar cult. They were part of a universal solar cult, which had Scythian origins. The Atonists would be a corrupt, they're a branch of these sun worshippers. Of course, as when people will read the book, they'll realize we're talking about a corrupt version of solar worship, but that's just one little group, right? Solar worship was all over the world, from the Brahmins to the Jews to the proto-Jews, the whole world. And then the Druids were the high priests of this solar cult. And their temple of wisdom was, what we call Ireland or Arya land. And it was well known. And being of that ilk, it meant then that they had camaraderie, right, with almost all the nations of the ancient world, not in terms of race, but in terms of caste, right? So when you talk in words that I do, people hear these echoes of racial theory. Yes, that's implied, but quickly they discover that it's really nothing to do with that. It has to do with a caste, a spiritual caste, who after the cataclysm tried to preserve whatever there was of the great astronomical wisdom and herbal wisdom and psychological wisdom and all the rest of it, tried to preserve that throughout the world. And that's where you see these common motifs in megalithic structures, common motif in the symbol of the serpent, in various other glyphs, in the division into three, which the Amonists always had a tripartite division in their gods, right? Where they had the father and they had the god and the goddess and the child, this kind of thing, all similar to Druidic philosophy, and on it goes. And I bring out as many of those comparisons as I can. So the Druids are a worldwide order with deep, deep connections to the Scythians, who's pretty much been airbrushed from history. There's so many lies told about them, and to many, many other groups. And the Amonist Druid connection for me is huge. But then the most important thing, the bigger thesis of the book, is the one that honors Commons Beaumont and honors Conor McDowry. And I pick up their meta thesis, which is that the elements of civilization did not in fact come from eastern lands like Egypt and India to the west, as all of history tells us, all the historians, all the history books, and all the thinkers that are academic. Well, yes, because it's all lies. Those were, if anything, they were returns. It's not to say that those movements from the east didn't happen, but they happened in much, much later ages. Originally, in the prehistoric era, in the prehistoric epoch, the original movement of the elements of civilization were from the west into the east, and that can be proven. But it's been a lifelong study of mine to find that proof. And one of the most extraordinary ones, just for your listeners, just to throw out one, is the megalithic mile and the megalithic inch, which is used in the construction of ancient sites. Well, it turns out that the finest, most precise measurements done on this Celtic or pre-Celtic measurement that built most of the stone circles we know in Europe is found to be in its finer mode, more accurate mode, the further west you go, and it gets more and more corrupt as you move towards the east, which means that the stone circles and megalithic monuments that you find in the eastern lands are far less accurate, you see, and that shows decline. So the perfect version of it is in the west. But of course, I can hear a critic saying, oh, that's because Eastern tribes moving west perfected this measurement you're talking about, Michael, and that's why you find the more perfect version in the west, because it's simple logic to tell you that as they traversed and built stone circles from the west to the east, they got better. Yes, that's nice, and that's a nice theory, but it means nothing because they've actually know that the stone circles we're talking about in the west are the oldest. So that's the theory falls to the ground instantly. And what happened? Silence, crickets. When this was finally discovered, that, oh my God, not only are there more perfect measurements found in the west, but they're the oldest stones, we had to be silent. Absolute silence fell. So as I say, it's my job to resurrect some of these facts, hand them to people in an unbiased way and say, what do you make of that? What happens to our whole history of the planet if we do indeed just even conceive of the fact that the original elements of civilization, of which there are many, but mathematical ones like we've just mentioned, let alone language or any other music or what have you, originated in the West, moved to the East, and then maybe at a later date, after the effects of the cataclysm had passed away, the descendants of these original aria took it back to the West, and that's where official history starts. So official history starts many stages too late, at a time when these traditions were coming back. And we have to now realize that that's part chicanery. It's true to a degree, but it omits an infinitely more interesting story. That again, the ancient mythologies are only too happy to confirm that existed.
Maybe we should think at this point, again, to cater for people who are new to your work and new to this whole story, maybe we should get into what happened in Egypt and how that affected Ireland's development, because as you pointed out several times, there's been the reason why people don't hear about this stuff is because there's been an agenda to kind of wipe it out. And would you say it's accurate to say that the reason why the wiping out of this culture happened was because of like a beef pretty much that stemmed between the Atenists and the Ammonists, and it all started back in Egypt?
Yeah, I think that's where it started, because what we know, when we scroll forward from that conflict, we come to a key period of Irish history, which is a little later than the 500 BC moment. But there, around about that time, we have the coming of the Gaels, the coming of the Milesians. This is well known to anyone who's even looked at Irish history briefly. Well, those Milesians are the Atenists. And the Annals of Ireland confirm that. And the Scotic Chronicon, which is the Scottish annals, confirm it. And they're not the only ones that confirm it either. Even geology confirms this. Digs that have happened in Spain and so on. We could go on at length about this. But you're quite right. The conflict that happened to these Atenists, who I think were descended from the Scythians, was a breach that happened in Egypt of such consequence that its echo effect was taken to Ireland. In other words, the descendants of Akhenaten, after being thrown out of Egypt, made their way back here. And that journey is known. It's even picked up in the Bible with the story of the Israelites. It turns up in many areas, but of course the Bible will be the most intriguing account, right? But it actually happened. And then when these characters got here, they were thoroughly depraved and corrupt. They seized the thrones from the other Druidic, proto-Druidic groups that were here. And to me, that is then the fall of the world in real terms. In hardened terms, that's when things went wrong and sorcery took the place of magic. And this is a story that's been concealed in the works of Professor Tolkien and as many other places. Many other mythologies recount this in various colorful ways. Even the story of King Arthur is very much an account of this. So evil comes to the world through these corrupt, but very high. I mean, these are extremely high adepts. They had mystery schools of their own. But they, for some reason, became corrupted. They're worshippers of Set. If you really want to get into it, I do so on my Female Illuminati site and other articles that I've tried to lay this out as I've gone, because it's an unfolding story. But they're actually kind of worships of Set. So Aton is correct, but it's really Set Aton. There's so much more to this than people could ever imagine. So they're worshippers of darkness, you see. And then when you talk about the suppression from the church and from the Jesuits and all of that side of it, these are Atenist cabals. These are Atenist cabals. We know them as one thing, but they're really something else. But it wasn't just suppression, was it? That would be bad enough. It was also appropriation. It was also cannibalization. So the very people who suppressed this ancient wisdom of the prehistoric period were happy to magpie it. And that's what you've got. Every single aspect. I bring this out in a book on astrotheology, just to, I wanted to get in deeper to this. But in that book, I show that every single aspect, bar none, of what we call Christianity, even if it's in its sanitized version as Protestantism or the more elaborate, grandiose aspect of Catholicism, it wouldn't matter. It's all Druidism. Every single part of it. So, and again, that's something that's so controversial. People have to take time. And my work is really only for unbiased people. It's not for the mass audience at all. I've never solicited them. I don't care what they think about it. It's for discerning minds who really are interested in looking at the history of the world, but looking at it as it is a holy work. It's not a history lesson I'm giving. It is a introduction to spiritual truth, which it has an enormous impact on one's own spiritual development.
And it's very liberating as well, I must say. Again, like I said earlier, for those who can actually, who can keep an open mind and aren't going to let their emotions sway them into believing one thing or another. And, obviously key to that is being separate, trying to be separate from your background and upbringing and do your own research. And on that note, looking at the connections between Ireland and Egypt in terms of what kind of evidence do we have of these connections and how far back do they go? And I know that we've got, I know in your work you mentioned King Menes, I think that was 4000 BC, and Scota as well. And I believe they're both, they were both buried in Ireland.
They are. County Kerry, you can walk right over to it. Take a Polaroid snapshot. Yeah, exactly. The daughter of Akhenaten, and possibly the granddaughter, if you want to be a little more generous. But either way, or it could even be the ashes of the original queen. We don't know those things for sure, but we know, like I said, if you treat the mythologies as absolute fact, then we have something incredible in front of us. But we also have that in terms of Jeremiah and Tia Tefi over in Navan. It doesn't just end with the two of them, We have King Menes, as I said. But the one that is, of course, most interesting is the fact that Meritaten herself, Akhenaten's daughter, who made it all the way with King Meal, that was her husband. That's how you get the Milesians and the Gaelic influx. Whoever knew there was an Egyptian tie into that? Well, there was. And then you have Lorraine Evans, a professor of archaeology. She was blackballed when she found that there was not only evidence of Egyptian ships in England, which had always habitually been denied, And then she found beads, very, very famous beads in Egypt, jewelry found in pits and barrows in England. And her book is called Kingdom of the Ark. It's a good starting place. If people are really, overwhelmed by this, just start with her book if you can get it still. Because I say there's been a hell of a campaign of suppression even in modern times. And she will show you how deep it goes. They found Barbary apes buried in Navan Fort that cannot be explained. And they found Celtic artwork in Egypt. They found cocaine in the tombs of the mummies in Egypt that can only come from South America. They found parrot feathers, and on and on and on it goes. And so there's too much evidence, archaeological, I don't know what, but you don't need much more than the evidence of King Menes, and he came down Loch Foyle. He was on a ship, and it's because he wanted to come home. At the end of his reign, he goes, I'm going back, and the inscriptions say, I'm going back to the blessed isles of the setting sun in the far west, where they knew that civilization had come from. It follows what we said. If the fountain of real civilization was in the west, then many Eastern peoples would want to visit that and consider that the paradisical isles. Well, that's exactly what they did. And that whole story of Arthur going to Avalon is a replaying of the story of the coming of King Menes, he didn't want to die before he had seen the green fields of his original homeland, his people's homeland. But sadly, as they sailed into Loch Foyle, he got stung by a hornet and died because, it was poisonous. And then he was buried here in Knockmany. The Professor L.A. Waddell, these are people who would take half an hour, to list off their academic citations, just in case there's anyone listening, from Trinity University, any debunker. Yeah, do you want me to waste the time to cite these men's academic citations? Well, this guy went out there and he took the original rubbings. They're all gone now. They're weathered away. Well, the original rubbings have already been taken. And Professor L.A. Waddell, you'll find a page on him in my Irish Origins website. He wrote books on this, went to Egypt, where King Menes' official tomb, but it was an empty tomb because Menes himself had disappeared, right? And he reconstructed the whole history of that first pharaoh. And the things he discovered, he's one of the people that say when you even say in the word Fenian in Ireland, it actually is a corruption of the word that really refers to the Phoenicians. And then he tells you that story. He wrote a whole book on it. So see when you start getting into this, it becomes a life study. And after even like a few weeks of studying this, you have no more time anymore for anything which you've been told by some tour guide at Tara or Newgrange and the babble and the bull crap that they're telling you. You have no more time for any academic shit except in a supplementary way, because the real story is infinitely more fascinating. Oligarchy comes from Olam, the high druid, right? Aristocracy comes from Arya, the Druids, who were the original spiritual aristocracy. The plagiarization, cannibalization, and rescripting of ancient Druidic lore is permeating our world. Every aspect of Christianity, even Brahmanism, you name it. Egyptology. You can't see these things aright unless you're thinking of the Irish connection. Barry Fell, another professor, epigraphic school, top professor in America, discovered Phoenician Irish script in Arizona and in places in America. When they dug out the Ohio Serpent, a very famous mound, right, of an ancient Cyclopean ruin, they're pulling out Irish bracelets, Irish artifacts. I actually knew the guy, Glenn Kimball, who was involved in a lot of that. And he says, we're pulling out torques, Irish torques. When they were in Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt, 70 Irish torques were discovered. Why didn't that reach the press? Yeah, because there was a commerce between these people. And you see, to me, there's no learning curve or, big, furrowed brow. When we talk about this dispersion and when we talk about these interconnectivities between these lands, I have no problem accepting. I don't even know why you would. But it's part of that flat earth mentality. If you sail too far to the east or west, you'll fall off the edge of the world. And people believe that for thousands of years. So we're talking about an incredible campaign of mind control to stop people sailing out, especially independent types, until they finally couldn't stop it and it happened. But up until that point, they didn't even want you going to this mystery islands, of the other world where the ghosts and the goblins will get you. Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think the Vatican and other places pervade that lie? Because they didn't want smart, intelligent, wealthy men sailing out to the island to learn, the truth. And there's so much that could be said about that, because even the Spanish sailors contained the truth about Ireland, and they had gone around the British Isles frequently, even despite these bans. And so in their traditions, You want to look into that. There's whole thesis of looking into what the Spanish and the Andalusian sailors knew about the land of Ireland. It's fascinating reading, actually.
Yeah, this is big, and there's clues of it everywhere, like you pointed out, and it kind of changes your whole outlook on the world, because everything really ties back into it. And as you pointed out there, the big organizations, whether you're talking about the Vatican or anyone connected in with academia, they don't want people knowing about this stuff, because they'll realize that they've been robbed, and that, like, a lot of these organizations they're foundations of, well, they're kind of bastardizations of what went before, aren't they? I mean, they're like you said, they're rehashings of old ideas, but these watered down versions of Vaticanism and stuff like that.
That's right. Judaism, Christianity, Masonry. Find me an element in there that doesn't either directly or indirectly come from the Druidic tradition, and you won't be able to do it. I've made a life study of this, and I'm convinced. And it even goes deeper than what we're talking about. We'll have to, do other interviews in the future that go into specific aspects of this, perhaps, if you're into that. But again, just an overview. It's an incredible story. And I think the Arctic homeland, thesis basically is confirmed in mythology, that there was a font of all wisdom. There was a decline, a spiritual fall. A garden is involved, as we know in the Old Testament, but that comes from Dilmun and some Sumerian scripts. What's it all boiled back to? These are just reiterations of an antitype, an archetype that I've spent time unpacking. Like I said, the suits of the tarot, for instance, the tarot cards, the 4 suits, the 13 treasures of Britain, and so much more. And so one puts it together in as clear a fashion as they can. That's been my life's work, to do that in the Irish Origins site. And in the books, the site is mostly appendices, you see, to the book, because this is an ongoing. My work is not the last word on this. It was all dedicated as a kickstart of a subject that had lapsed after the death of people like Commons Beaumont. And my work is an attempt to kickstart it, get people's interest in it, because there's still a lot of lies being purveyed out there by some very, very hostile people in Britain, writing books on some of these subjects, but they are extremely territorial in when it comes to knowledge, and they're not in any way open to the message of somebody like myself when it comes to Ireland. They have a tremendously xenophobic attitude that the truth will actually come out, as if it's in some way going to compromise their own teachings and all of that. So there's still stuff going on today that's markedly antagonistic to this message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's familiar, that childishness of the establishment and the individuals involved. They're putting their egos before the truth, and that's what we're up against. And just thinking of as well, to move into the Christianity topic and the conversion to Christianity. I'm aware that because it ties into the whole what happened with the Druids. There's the official story, and then there's the occulted version, and which you've kind of dug out, and some other authors have kind of dug out over the years. So what's the difference between the two? What's the official story say about the conversion to Christianity, and then what really happened?
Well, as I say, Christianity wouldn't exist without this archive. When the Milesian Gaels came, after they did their conquest of Ireland, they were very successful. They actually conquered the place. Then a slow, gradual, it's like somebody coming to Aladdin's cave. What are you going to do? You're going to start sorting out all the booty, right? So they basically wholesale murdered all the bards. That's one thing. And I mean, a wholesale murder, slaughter. That's why I keep saying it. It's a footnote. But Geoffrey Keating, one of the greatest Irish scholars, whose book is accepted as an academic classic. Well, it's right in there. What's wrong? It's not Michael de Tsarion saying this. That the bards were annihilated. And the reason why they were annihilated, in a combination of the Vatican, the papal power, and the autocratic kingly power of Britain, right, is because the bard was the one who preserved the heredity, right, the lineages of all the kings. So all the kings of Tara, the kings, whoever, the chieftains of all of Ireland, all the provinces, and probably this included a lot of Britain and Wales as well, they really didn't know who their ancestors were. That was not kind of something that was really foremost on their mind. And the reason was because that was the bard's job. So when the bards were annihilated, it cut the cords. It was an act of treason so that the royal families now could be manipulated. I mean, versions of this have happened all over the world, right? But this was one act that the Irish was the prototype in destroying that intelligentsia, to disconnect people from their past. That was one thing. Subsequent to that, the Milesian elites, these would be Atnists now we're talking about, needing to galvanize their power, because after all, these are displaced Egyptians. They don't have an empire anymore, and they want one right back. The world is not enough, as the James Bond movie shows you. And you'd be amazed what those films are revealing if you really know how to, decode things symbolically, right? But the world was not enough. And so from Ireland then, from Britain, from the British Isles, they would create a new empire in which the sun would never set, Aton, the sun. And that's what you still got going in one perverse version or the other, in the next 2,000 years or whatever, right? But part of that job was the appropriation and the cannibalization of this knowledge. And so what we know is the Christian monks, some were sympathetic to the tradition and others were totally antagonistic. But really, that's a moot point as far as I'm concerned, because the damage had been done. And what they did was they systematically, this would have been done through a group called the Chaldees, or the Chaldeans were very much part of this. In other words, Celtic Christianity. Celtic Christianity was left alone by the papal groups so that they could sift. I mean, this Celtic Christian group, if you really know what you're talking about, actually controlled the papal group. They had fallings out later, as all of these psychopaths have. They have rivalries. But originally, the basic general connectivity between the two was that the papal group in Europe left the Celtic Church to its own because they knew what was going on, and they had to step back and let it go. And this has been whistle-blown in movies like Name of the Rose, by Echo or whatever his name is. But in other words, even National Treasure films, even up to more of a recent time, have whistle-blown a lot of this. So the cannibalization process took thousands of years. It was slow. It was painstaking. I think they were still doing it up to the Henry VIII and beyond. But to answer your question, what we know as Christianity, as it sifted, as it plagiarized, as it cannibalized, what we know as Christianity grew and grew and grew. That's why if you go to Vatican City, there ain't anything Christian about the city. It's nothing but pagan stuff all over the damn place. There's nothing negative with it. It's just that's the fact of the matter. So the Christianity we know today, the bishoprics and the clergy and all of the I'm thinking here of the regalia, the pomp and ceremony, the calendar dates of which certain celebrations are done, all sorts of, all the traditions are based in this cannibalization, right? And so there's deep, deep connections. And I've written, like I say, Trees of Life, and then this book on astrotheology to tease those out even more. So, just to fill out the case and to provide evidence of this. And so many words like Re, right? Ard Re, High King. Well, Ra, you have Ra, the High King, the High God over in Egypt, and so on it goes. So the connections are actually very interesting. And there's a whole, if you go to the Irish Origins of Civilization website, there's an appendix section which starts with a thing on Druidic symbolism. It's in 3 parts. And people can just look at that. It's all free. They can go there and and there's other pages as well, which explores this symbolism and how a lot of it, one group we didn't mention that was deeply connected to the Druids. I mentioned the Egyptians and the Scythians. The other group of paramount importance is the Persians. Not the Persians as Islam, which happened again 600 AD. Look how late we're talking now. But I'm talking about the actual Persian, the lost Persian magi, the 3 magi who turned up in the Nativity. That's what I'm talking about. They're Druids. And the treasures that they brought are 3 again. There's that old Druidic number. And so it goes. So the Druids of Ireland and Britain and Scandinavia were deeply connected to the Persians, who was actually an Aryan tradition, a high Aryan tradition. And their kings like Xerxes and Darius, right? Darius, think of the name. It has the etymology of Arya in it. And inscriptions found by the Persian king said, I am he who of the great Arya. It's mentioned right there. And you'll often notice that in Sumerian, Babylonian depictions, right? You see the king holding the little basket. People wonder what that little thing is he's holding. It looks like a little, case or basket that he's holding. That's seeds to plant the holy tree. Just as the Druids did. They were tree worshippers. And the Persian king was always shown to carry the little basket, because he was the keeper of the tree. So every one of the Persian and Babylonian Sumerian traditions are Druidic. They're from the West. And in my books, I prove that. Absolutely, hands down, prove that. And the lies we've been told about when people try to reverse it to make it look like that maybe Western culture was based on the Sanskrit or based on the Hindu or based on the Persian, and it's all lies. But of course, it's something that comes also with a lot of mind control in it and a lot of entrainment. And if you've never been put on to these great sages of the past, well, you'll just bite down on whatever, Big Brother tells you to believe. And that's what's happened.
Do you think as well that's why, just to kind of zoom out and look at Ireland and the history of it as a whole, do you think that that's perhaps why it seems that obviously the British Crown and the ruling types seem to have been so hard on Ireland? It wasn't just, of course, they had the land and they used the food and the resources to feed the army and all that stuff. But I think maybe at the top of the pyramid, they were quite happy to keep the Irish suppressed and to, bring Christianity in and use the church to control as well as the military to kind of completely stop the stamp out entirely any sort of of the Irish culture or genetics or the Druidic teachings, to stop it kind of being a threat in the future.
Yeah, they're very worried. When you talk about a fountainhead of knowledge, it's active even if it's covered over by 100 feet of concrete. The grass can still grow through the cracks. And so having completely dominated Ireland and having created their world empire, what we're living in now is the Atnist Empire. But the taking of Ireland was a key aspect. See, these Atnists actually went back to Scythia first. They went to Spain. That's, the Milesians crossed over from Spain. That one's kind of known. But they actually went to Scythia first. This is less known. And they weren't allowed back in. They were so corrupt that their Scythian ancestors wouldn't let them in, and there was pretty much a battle. It wasn't a war, but it was a really good tussle between Briogan, I think his name was, one of these Atnists from Egypt, who tried to get back and ingratiate himself, and he wasn't accepted any more than when they first came to Ireland. A guy called If wasn't accepted. They killed him on the site, right? So when I said earlier that it was an easy takeover, yeah, it was, bar one incident. Their first arrivals, the Milesian king or the Milesian agent was immediately killed, and then later on the takeover took place. But they know that when you have a soil so rich as what you have in Ireland, it's the font of all culture. It could rise again. So this is a pet, like Spectre with his white cat, right? Groom it, stroke it, feed it, keep it under surveillance, because this country could produce wonders. So what do you do to stop that happening? You create mayhem. You create blood of the Irishman. You wave something in his face. Revolution, freedom, liberty for all, right? And they know that the Irish spirit is aligned to truth. But they have what I call them sorcerers. You want to know why I do that? Do you think that's a joke? That's something borrowed from fiction? They know what the Irish spirit is capable of. It's built the world. It built America. It built Canada, for goodness sake. So you have to use a particular kind of magic, sorcery would be the better word, to keep these people drunk through alcohol. And the symbolism on the alcohol is a study in itself. You've got to keep them brainwashed in Jesuit colleges, worshiping Jesus. Yeah, the sun. Yeah, the Druidic sun king. Yeah, let's talk about that. Iesous, Dionysus, right? Oh, shit. The thing is happening today. Then on top of that, add this fact, that these people being psychopathic from these prehistoric periods have had many conflicts and rivalries in amongst themselves. So when we pick up the history of Ireland as it would go from the Chaldean church, right, the Christian church, then we have the conflict between the Christian church in Ireland, the Celtic church, and the papists, right? Then that's on paper. We have the Merovingian conflicts. We've got the later conflicts with Adrian, and the takeover of Ireland. Then we've got Cromwell. You see, all the way down, it's been nothing but infightings of the same group. Now, if you're looking too close to the canvas, it all looks like different groups. And it looks like pretty much what we accept the official history to be. The British Crown intervening, the Protestants coming, the Catholic, all the stuff we know. That's what it looks like when you're stuck upright against the canvas. When you pull back a little bit, you realize, oh my God, it's the same cults fighting under different guises. So Masonry has a stranglehold here. The Jesuits have a stranglehold here. They've had it for a long, long, long time. Other, even more shady, I talk about the female Illuminati. Let's not get into that right now, but there's even more sinister goings on in Ireland to keep the place suppressed, to keep the Irishman shedding his own blood or that of his brothers, you see, which then has a very important geomantic effect. We could get into so many other subjects connected to, how this works on even ritualistic levels, the designs of cities. Just enormously interesting aspects that are satellite subjects to trauma, and how consciousness is kept on a very low, primitive level, and how a very high culture, an immensely high culture, can be brought low in an extraordinary falling off It's really something that has intrigued me for many years, how this has happened.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately it's not easy for people to see unless they're dedicated and are willing to just rise above the brainwashing. And I mean, even what we're talking about now, people will say, "Ah, well, sure, it's the ancient past." What how is that important when we've got all this stuff like geopolitics, mass migration, etc., etc.? And it's extremely important because what we're talking about is the destruction of culture, the erasing of history, and also the erasing of identity, which is what keeps you safe from harm in the present. And as your work has pointed out, and many other alternative researchers have pointed out, when you lose your identity, you can't defend yourself from control, and you can be molded into whatever they want you to be in the present. And I mean, the chaos that's spreading around the Western world now with the monoculture, they call it multiculturalism, but it's monoculture. All of that boils back down to this ancient stuff. So that there's parallels, isn't there? It's all about control, really.
Yeah, well said. And that original blueprint of destruction that happened here in Ireland, they've then rolled that out across the board. That was the blueprint, and then they said, okay, now we can do this here. The old idea, even during the First World War, of putting very antithetical peoples and tribes beside each other, knowing that as time goes by, this is going to foment destruction. Well, the British Crown, the British elite, and they're not British, by the way, but the black nobility, the Black Lodge, they have then repeated this formula because it works so well. It worked so absolutely well that the descent, one of the descent is through the Merovingian, the so-called French, they're not even French. The French Merovingians are the origin of the Dutch royal family. And they tried to break the chain by conversion religiously. They were in France, they were Catholic, but then in Dutch, when they moved to Holland, they became Protestants for all that's worth. And then they moved to be the British Crown. They gave rise to the Hanoverian dynasty that the present queen and her filthy spawn are part of. And they have no allegiance to Britain, Holland, Germany, or France. This is a globalist, internationalist Black Lodge that is absolutely infested the West. But again, these are people who have plagiarized, right? The coronation of the Queen. I did a thing on the coronation of the Queen, which shows all these Druidic elements and Amonist elements, right down to the rings that she's wearing and the staff that she holds, the scepter, and even some of the words that she is told to recite and all the rest of it. The whole thing is utterly Druidic. That can be found on the Unslaved website. So they've rolled out this mechanism of control. It's Faustian, it's Machiavellian, and it will work again and again and again until we wake up, you see, and step past this programming. And that involves understanding trauma. So my work always goes to the past, not because I'm a historian per se, but because I'm interested in psychology and how modern mechanisms of control, right? Modern architecture of control could not exist without them knowing us psychologically, that we're deeply, deeply traumatized. And that trauma is what they have done in the past, but it's also this physical cataclysm that they're making use of. They co-opt that. They co-opt the fact that in their stratagems, man has been traumatized by actual celestial, terrestrial cataclysm. That played into the hands of the deceivers and the sorcerers. So then when we talk about the countermanding action, it has to be one of healing. And then when you turn to say, okay, I accept that, how do I heal? Well, again, crickets. Who's out there dealing with ancestral trauma? There's not even one person in this movement of which I am a member, so-called, whatever the hell it's called, alternative research community. You used to actually be worth that name. Now it's not. But even on a better day, well, who's dealing with this concept of trauma? Not a single one. And yet you cannot break, right, the iron hand of control now, let alone the public consensus trance or anything else. It's simply impossible. It's no more possible than a man on crutches, right? You kicking away his crutches and saying, walk. No, he's on those crutches for a reason, because he's disabled, physically disabled. Well, when you understand that you're psychologically and emotionally disabled, then obviously you can't have sovereignty. You will not have peace. You will not have stable, sane socio-political structures or a worship until that's so. Otherwise, you'll be clinging. What you'll do is be leaning. You'll be using handrails. All the religious structures, the scientific structures, the institutionalized structures are there to hold you up. And that's where we are right now. But learning to walk on our own with sanity, with religion and science that makes sense, we're not even close. And anyone who's come up to help us get there, like a Walter Russell, or, bring back some of these incredible visions of the universe, Victor Schauberger and many others, shoot them. Just shoot them down. We don't want that. So corruption is oozing, you see, from every source. And whoever's corrupt, salute, we follow. We're in immediate lockstep with the demagogue. But the sage, hang him.
Yeah, and it's just the way the world is right now, and it's been like that for quite a while. And now there's so many other areas we can go into, and the kind of the cult like what you call it, so-called progressivism or liberalism. Say, just to focus on Ireland for a moment, but also the Western world, but it's happening here too. This is becoming the new religion, But as those of us who can see it for what it is now, it's just another aspect of control that's now making people not think. And I know it's getting complex here, but anyway, just to conclude, I don't want to keep you too long here, Michael. I could talk to you all day, and I think that we should probably do more, and because we skipped over quite a lot, and I think it's important for people to know this material. Because there's a lot of people concerned about how things are going and all that stuff. But as you pointed out, you got to know about the human psyche and about manipulation before you can actually go and make a real difference.
That's essential. It's been an essential aspect of my work, and it's fallen largely on deaf ears. Not altogether. I always there's a very, very, very small percentage who get this, and everybody else is just the packing in the case to leave out consciousness, right? I mean, what do you think the High Druids taught? What do you think the mystery school tradition is? And yet we have been educated by the foulest creatures with the foulest ideologies, materialism, atheism, you name it. And even when it's in the name of religion, what have you got? It's despicable. And these institutions of evil still exist with our complicity today. That thing over in the Vatican, people are bowing and scraping at that, or whatever you've got. It's emaciated, it's anemic. And there's so many deceivers then when people go, oh, yeah, I know, I agree with you, Michael, I left that. Yeah, to go what? To the New Age movement? Or into some power-hungry masonry? They've covered they've got their brigands and they've got their highwaymen covering every road to get you to be into another partisan clique, have another pillow fight. So you can't get into this group because now you're rival to that group. And this is done in subtle ways, or it's done in extreme ways, right? So I've always talked about studying evil, the anatomy of evil, right? If you want to be on the good side, you have to then thoroughly know your enemy, as thoroughly as they know you, and of course even more. But that is a holy work. That's not just some intellectual, I'm bored. What kind of books are in the shop window right now? What's on the bestseller list? Are you kidding me? It takes devotion of the monk. It's lonely work. It's very hard. You're going to instantly be against your family members and the lads at the pub. You'll be on your way to wisdom. There's no question that you will know that you are wise and that you're climbing the mountain, and as every step you go, you're getting greater and greater vista into the whole. Yeah, but that has its own weight, right? It has its own terribleness about it. And I really don't think that a lot of people, in fact, what I see is distraction from it. A lot of the idioms that are thrown up in our world today are to either offer further more distractions to people who claim to be seeking the truth. But, as Schopenhauer and others knew, so what do you want to pay for that truth? Well, you don't want to pay in blood. You want it easy. So then the publishing houses, right, will give you watered down versions. The History Channel will offer you endless titillating, always ending with questions. So what's going on? All this millions of dollars and still we're asking questions at the end? Why are they not ended? Why? Because they won't touch a commons moment. They won't touch any of the people I'm talking about. They will not deal with the real story. So of course you're bound to have more and more questions. So, but it's like the carrot and the stick thing. In our Architects of Control, in my Architects of Control film, I have this character, Monty Python, leading you through the streets up into a blinking field with nothing on it. Well, that's what academia is today. That's just keep on, posing the question. Round and round we go. They will not give us answers. And we are not demanding them. And so that's why life goes by. And, you have to pick up the slack on your own basis. I mean, you should have learned this in school. But unfortunately, the people who are into what I'm doing have had to say, oh, my God, I've been lied to. So, it's like the great Lloyd Pye say, everything you know is wrong. Well, I didn't invent that. I don't want it to be that way. But I've had to pick up the slack and have a monumentally torturous journey to the truth that I know now. Well, then why don't, I can't then turn around and say to the other person not to embark on the same thing. It becomes ludicrous to say that. What I can do is make it easier. So in my work and my websites, that I can do, to present a life study, right, for people. And also not only that, but a synthesis of thousands upon thousands of other works, experts, what they've had to say that may contribute, and to put together this collage. And many of these books come from many, many centuries ago. So then I'll sort of redact those books and take the essence of them and make them more simple to make the whole process easier. But that's all I can do. And I want to see that it's of use. So, yeah, but at the other side, you have to then accept that there's no mass awakening going to be taking place. I've never thought of that anyway. But just to make it doubly clear, this is a work that you pick up reverently because it's deconstructive and apophatic. And involves a whole different kind of thinking than the one that we're taught about. And that most people, when they say they have knowledge, they've got it through a very, very different acquisitive process, not through deconstruction. That's a very, very different kind of process of learning that involves psychology, speculation of the enemy, trying to look through the keyhole, trying to fathom what they're doing, how they work. It's very, very different level of insight and intuitiveness that is required, always backed up with facts. See, so on one hand, you're doing the intuitive work or with imagination and speculative work, and the others you try to keep up to date with modern discoveries. And like I say, these National Geographics, I meticulously record that. So when people go to any of my websites, it's all right there. It's all been meticulously placed there. All these discoveries and links, so that people can follow up every single word I'm saying. Nothing is said. Nothing is said without citation. Nothing is said without links, so that people can follow it up on their own and say, oh, where did that come from? And again, go to the site, irishoriginsofcivilization.com. They'll find a reading list there, and they'll find just copious links to follow, so that you'll ultimately be led to great thinkers before our time, people whose names should be revered, and people who are the true teachers that we should be bringing up the next generation to learn from, so that the picture of our world and these individual lands, is made much, much clearer than it is right now. And that will in itself then create an interest that hopefully will ameliorate the need of young people to get involved in sectarian activity. Because myself, I'm talking about studies I were doing right in the middle of the Troubles, right there in South Belfast, that affected every aspect of our lives. People were shot in our street, bombs, the whole thing, right in the middle of Belfast, in the middle of the Troubles. And there's me going around with a magnifying glass looking at all the Masonic symbolism, which is extraordinarily, prevalent in Ireland, but even doing more, even doing geomancy, taking measurements of a lot of what I'm doing now, the seeds of it were planted way back then in the early 80s, for goodness sake. So, how many people do you know who commit to that length of study with no reward?
And do you think as well that's what's required? Because in a way, hard as it is to say, because obviously I'm sure you've noticed that the control system is now almost chucking more stuff at people and the consciousness of people, because I think the internet has kind of started to level the playing field in the last couple of decades, especially the last 10 years or whatever. And the control system is chucking stuff at us, more distractions, more mind control, the neo-Marxism, the political correctness, the global, the migration pacts, the centralized government stuff. And I think that to get us out of this mess, that's what we need, is people who are really dedicated and who need to be broad individuals, not just up to speed on politics, but they need to know about culture, they need to know about their own culture, they need to understand themselves as individuals as well. And also you got to understand the nature of the enemy. That's important as well, isn't it?
Yes, that's key important, because a lot of the identification that we have has been construed by them. There is our roots, our true roots, but unfortunately there's been so much skewing and twisting of that as well. So then when we find I've got these national beliefs or I've got these racial beliefs, Most of them are impure. They're not even correct anymore. And so there's many tentacles to this. So the consensus trance is the safety zone in which people say, I've grown up with this traditional background and I'm sticking to it hard and fast, and I'll fight tooth and nail to keep it, thinking that they're doing something virtuous. So we're already talking about independent minds and outsiders. I started off years ago talking about that, and it's the same today. I have never, ever preached to any choir. Not interested. I've never advertised myself. And even in the moments when I've done it, it's only been in very select moments for a very select purpose. I've even this year, like just a couple of months ago, we came off social media, right? YouTube specifically. And we've totally toned down social media interaction. I barely put a comment, half a line a month, and it has to be bloody justified for that. I'll still do posts because they're relevant, but we're down to like 10% of what we used to do when it came to social media. Couldn't care less. We're only interested now in, we've made the websites available. There's a lot of free material there. And that's it. That's all we can do because of what you talk about. That a thing that started off very positively, which had the aura of true libertarian freedom about its freedom of speech and so on, has been completely dominated by the fascists who are the Reds, the socialists. And in many ways, the only thing that's good that's happening is because of the utter hypocrisy of these people who, behind a socialistic veil, are now acting in a monstrously fascist way. Hopefully, a certain very important demographic, mostly people in the middle, can now start to see what's going on and see the chicanery. And so, sometimes we hold up mirrors to that as well, the worst offenses in our work, and, so that people can see some of that and have guests on who talk about that, because it's very, very important, not for extremists, they'll never change, but there's a certain unbiased group that normally sits on the fence. Those people are now vitally important in the future of Europe. And we're already seeing evidence that they're getting it. They're getting what's been going on. And then in my programs, we even bring other elements that are never dealt with, by anyone else in this movement. Subjects like, say, Islamo-communism, which is a huge piece that needs to fit in. How two hydras of, they become bedfellows after the Second World War. And I bring on the great experts who have written and who know that subject through and through. But again, that's a very, very small piece, and yet it's one of the most important pieces to decode what is happening. I've written, on the papacy and all of this. So there's a lot of good work out there. But as you say, there's tremendous distraction. There's so much static and noise, and that's why I go on I do maybe 2 radio shows a year. And when you contacted me, I was just absolutely overjoyed, to see the work that you're doing and the level of intelligence. Because I only now will go on radio shows publicly. You wouldn't believe the ones I've just turned down this week. I mean, big primetime stuff, right? Well, don't want nothing to do with it. So I'm hit up all the time by these creatures and just no chance. Their last guest was a stripper. Okay. Yeah. Can't wait to come on there with your millions of viewers. What the hell? What do I want with that? So, I'd rather talk to people like yourself who are well-meaning, studying seriously, thinking about things deeply, and then trying, as you say, to go to the next step and bring it to the world through a podcast or, a blog or a piece of writing. I mean, that's it for me. I have no other pretensions at all. I watch them come and I watch them go, and I still carry on doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for the compliments there, Michael. It's greatly appreciated, and it is all about kind of quality. And I suppose after being on the on your own journey for all these years doing the work that you do, I'm struggling with myself sometimes over the last few years, being involved in petty conversations or kind of stuff that's more low consciousness is just frustrating, because we don't have time for this stuff. That there's much deeper things that needed to be discussed here. And we were talking about, we just briefly touched on the stuff that's happening nowadays. What I see, and I'm sure you've noticed this as well, from my personal opinion, one of the scariest things that's happening nowadays is that people are being warped morally. they don't know the difference between right and wrong because of the ideologies, the Fabian socialist style takeover of Ireland, the last few decades. That's now in front of everybody's faces and they can't see it. Everyone's talking about diversity and equality, and you're kind of looking at people going, where did you get these ideas from? They're just ideologies. That's the scariest thing that's I've noticed. And to tie it back into what we were talking about, that there is an ancient wisdom and a knowledge there for us, but it's been pasted over so much, and now people are becoming these, I hate to say it, but they're almost like half people. They're not really there. And we are in a war of sorts, and I suppose we just have to keep putting the information out there and inspiring people to just find themselves and just snap out of it.
Yeah, you're right. Well said. They're becoming a victim of the sludge culture, which has been boil the frog. It's been foisted on them over time through these idiot sitcoms, which have given them all the memes to which they're obsessively glued. You see, so the Neighbours and Brookside and Coronation Street and Emmerdale and EastEnders and all that shash, and they bloody followed it because you've been denuded spiritually. Libraries are closing. As I say, sages are pilloried. False leaders and demagoguery. As I said, we get into lockstep behind the demagogue because there's all sorts of other big daddy psychology, power struggle psychology involved. And I've gone into that in my Dragon Mother thesis, about why this destabilization takes place, when it takes place, and what are the consequences of it. And a great deal of it has to do with, our dislike of getting older, our dislike of entering into the solar world where it demands us to be inventive and to use our reason. And Big Brother, the nanny state, the Fabian socialists, as you say, they have made it that you don't need to. You can remain on an infantile level. Big Daddy, Big Nanny will take care of you. It's communism light, as you correctly noted. And so it's not the Bolshevik type of hard boot in the face communism. The Fabians always warned the Bolshevik leaders that wouldn't work, and they were right. This is the Marcusean aspect. This is the Fabian version, right? Socialism with a smile. That they realize that affluence will be the biggest leash, not the boot in the face like they tried in the iron, behind the Iron Curtain countries. That didn't work. That just in the end up the people threw them over. Well, they don't want that now. They don't want to be thrown over, and they're not going to be thrown over because they've offered you affluence. The very things that after suppressing cultures for centuries economically, they now give you, smartphones and big screen TVs. And tomorrow it'll be cars that drive themselves or whatever else, headsets where you never have to leave the virtual reality world. And on it goes. In other words, it's all escapes from selfhood, escapes from listening to the voice of my own emotions, listening to the dark voices within my own head, you see, with more happy pills. So we've been talking here the majority of the time about ancient history. As I've said at other times, my interest in ancient history is spawned by a deep, abiding interest in what's happening right now. So it's not like a normal person who'd say, I love history. I'm interested in all the dynamics we see today, be it in terms of gender, be it in terms of politics, be it in terms of religion and race. Right? The kernel was what I learned on the streets of Belfast, but my God, look where it's gone. But it all boils down to the fact that unless you understand ancient trauma, you can't understand how the cowboy and the sheepdog, whip that herd of cows and steer. It steers the steers. It steers them in a certain direction with a single crack of the whip. How is that possible? So then it's the Orwellian control, right? Which is far more sophisticated than the old Bolshevik, regimented thing. That was one incarnation of it. They realized their mistake. And so they set up the institutes like the Frankfurt School, and they had many dissenters as well. There's certain great thinkers there who didn't go along with the gig and truly were more humanitarian. But the core of it said, hey, we've got to co-opt this feeling of ancient trauma. And that means we've got to have wars and rumors of wars, perpetual headlines of disaster and chaos, even when there isn't going to be any. And we have to have as Albert Pike said, unleash the nihilists. What he meant was unleash the headlines. Trade unions on strike again, war in the Gulf, tsunamis, atomic blasts in Fukushima, and all the crime in our streets, right? The feral kids, the economic frauds, internet insecurity. And we just say, have you got a key and a lock? And you got a little safe space for me called my life, called Western. That's Western culture. And I just locking myself in. I don't want to know. So it's like one of these Charles Bronson apocalyptic films where the fucking crimos are just hopping the fences and running over the walls, burning the city. And while everybody just sits inside and turns up the TV as loud as they can get it. Cowardly, docile, fat, weak, right? Inebriated by coke and sugar and cigarettes and booze and happy pills, anything to suppress the natural intelligence. That's the chaos. Where's the heroism in that? It doesn't exist in the West. And so absolutely, we will now want to pattern ourselves on some Middle Eastern, semi-savage pattern right out of the past. And if it wasn't that, it'd be something else. Because the roots of our own culture have been so utterly torn up. But I believe, you see, that you must study that process. Because there's a tremendous spiritual reasons for doing so. Because it is, after all, evil. And no person can say they're good unless they know the nature of evil. There's no other equation. You can't break that equation. Any other pretensions towards goodness is just nonsense. Real ethics, real morality, as Immanuel Kant and other people said, you've got to know 100% what are the origins of it. And one of the origins of morality is freedom. All right, now we're talking about freedom. What is that? Well, that's the hallmark of the Creator. The Creator gave you the essence of what He is, which is the freedom to do evil, the freedom to do good. But I'm giving you the complete freedom because there's no coercion involved in a true spiritual connection with the source. So the essence of why you're moral, right, is because you've been given a gift of gifts, the very thing that Spirit has as its essence, which is freedom. Now you can do freedom to create, freedom to fight pathogens, you see, to be immune, or no, just sit on the couch, turn on the TV and drift off into some delta waves, passively accepting the flow of history, the flow of politics, the flow of what, the Labour Party or the Conservative Party or the Pope or whoever, points in the direction of, you just go along with that. That's fine. I have no problem. I'm not going to fight that.
The sad thing about it is that people are, and for those of us who understand how the control system works and understand how the occultists, the puppeteers, how they work, is that they like to get people to mess themselves up using their own free will. So it's beyond, like you said, the old boot in the face type of communism or oppression where, it's machine guns running in with the machine guns. Now it's a different tactic. They condition people to not want to be free and to actually convince them, that they should enjoy the prison cell. So they, it's a whole new way of doing it. It's actually quite very effective.
Yeah, they've triggered in. They've bought into the idea that we want freedom from freedom, and we really do want that. So then they say, well, let's provide it. Now, what this does, of course, is it says, okay, that doesn't exonerate these leaders for doing what they're doing. But as I've said from day one, what is the slave doing to reciprocate? What role is he playing in the master-slave dynamic? Well, that's it. You're hinterlanded. You are immediately given a ticket to hinterland. Get out of town by noon. We don't want to see you around here, Michael. That's psychology, mate. That's getting to the root of it. No, I belong to the Occupy movement. I'm an anarchist. I'm fighting back. My guns are hidden, and I'm looking at them, going, "Oh my God, is that what we're talking about?" And America specifically is one of the most anti-psychological places on earth, but unfortunately everywhere's followed it. It used to be traditionally a very anti-psychological place. They've tried and every single other fix, but it never strays far from, say, a sort of quasi-religious or a political, sort of strategy. There's just an absolute resistance, cognitive dissonance against psychology. And unfortunately that now has gone across the board. And if we're not very careful, even the most generic 101 level of Freudianism, Jungianism, I don't know what ism, in a psychological sense, is going to be completely forgotten or totally misconstrued. It's already being misconstrued. Some of even the most basic primitive stuff of what these men talked about. I had to do a whole series on Otto Rank, and of course, and even on Thomas Szasz and these people. And it's very much spiced with a lot of the Freudian stuff to bring it back, to say this is very valuable information. It has a lot of appeal, and we can't afford this to fall through the cracks. Because losing these great tools of decipherment and self-analysis is exactly what Big Brother wants. And so, my work is very heavily psychological and philosophical for that reason, is because we can't afford to lose these tools. Then we've really lost something valuable in the West. Psychology is so valuable. It's far more valuable than religion, or politics. And so when I see a lot of people running around well-meaning in these different, parties, be they on the right or whatever, but I can see that they're painfully collectivistic and painfully anti-psychological. How can you have faith in any of that, you see? But again, I don't go and force it down their throats. I present the work there and these different articles and websites, and it's up for those people to come along. But when you've understood fundamentally that the vast majority of people want freedom from freedom, now you understand why an architecture of total tyranny of the Orwellian brand, it exists today and is likely to stand forever.
The solutions, I mean, the fact that there's so much fear, and we've talked about the lethargy or the slobbish kind of culture and all that. I wonder if there's a connection there where they're happy for us to be in our pampered comfort zone all the time, because then the idea of even this most simple spiritual act of rebellion or maturity is to pay attention to your own emotions, to understand the self, to accept your strengths and weaknesses. Like, that's the core of psychological development, and that's the foundations upon which you can start to build a real rebel personality who can affect changes out in the world around you. And the more we have a society where people are these Facebook photo likes, the more people are social media, the more they're addicted to pleasure and the Pavlovian sort of stuff, the more they're addicted to all of these comfort zones and simple little pleasures. I think really it's making you into a weak spiritual person, and then you just in the end you just become like another kind of person who's no threat to the system at all.
Well said. I agree 100% with that. That's what your soy boy culture is. You see, you live on the social media. You don't have to have eye contact. You don't have to have one-to-one deep emotional connections with anyone. There's no availability, really. It's just a digitized availability, superficial. All the ideologies and the demagoguery, the crowd becomes a surrogate womb in which you can become infantilized. And so your pleasures are, of a 4-year-old. And this goes for adult people. It's okay if you're 4 years old. It's not good if you're 40 years old. So the classic infantilization, which the Frankfurt School, we have it in their own documents, for goodness sake. Herbert Marcuse was basically an orgiast. He was basically a hedonist, right? At the end of his life, he didn't sign off on communism. He still was a card-carrying Marxist, but he had admixture. You see, he had put in so many other elements that didn't exist when Marx wrote his work. But one of the admixture was just pure satanic hedonism. He actually advocated it to his pupils in a school and wrote on it that basically, guys, I'm a Satanist. Which is not in the spiritual sense, but in the orgiastic, I'm seeking pleasure. Let the carnival begin. And a lot of the teens at that time, the 20-somethings listening to this of a socialistic persuasion, signed on, and they went out to be the Germain Greers. They grew up to be the leaders of society. Now do you know why we have a culture of child abduction and pedophilia and orgiasm all over the planet, from corner to corner? Because it was ideology. It was told to the socialist groups, this is all right, to live for pleasure. There is no God. There is no afterlife, right? There's no purpose or spiritual meaning in anything. So just, as you say, live decadently. Live for even the smallest pleasures. And that's a life without purpose and meaning. Nietzsche called it decadent. You're either decadence or nihilism. Nihilism is in the man who did have a belief system, a deep one, but then he found out, that's no longer sustainable. Those values don't work. So he becomes completely nihilistic. He doesn't believe in anything. But at least he had in his core one time a belief system. A value system would be a better term. The decadent guy just goes, I don't even know what that means. And he's just out for fun and kicks. And Nietzsche said that's what you can have. And that's exactly what we have. And the strange thing about it is that even when some people say, but I am religious. Yeah, but are you really? Or is that religion a decadent move? Have you got into it because it's New Age movement and you chum up with your little friends? You see, and all this nonsense. Is it really personal to yourself? Are you on a personal journey? Or is it just clubbing up with a bunch of New Age nutballs? And talking about, remote viewing or, when are the angels coming to save us all and all this shite that went on, since the 70s. I was very deeply involved with people who were in this movement, so I know it through and through. And even though it's not all together, a tissue of lies for the most part as it evolved through into all this nonsense. And again, remember I talked about the dumbing down of psychology? That's how you get this coaching stuff and how you get all of this Anthony Robbins type of thing. It's not that it's negative in and of itself. It's just that what do you have to be? You must be so low on the scale of self-esteem that you need some cretin like that to motivate you. Oh yeah, motivational stuff I'm talking about. I mean, I'm not against it in and of itself, but I also have the question of, this is basics. This is ABCs. And by the way, if you'd really read truth sages like Ayn Rand and Nathaniel Branden, who wrote extensively on self-esteem, you wouldn't need to spend and make these guys into billionaires. The works are already there. And there's even other works I can cite on this, that came out in the 70s. Good, authentic stuff. There was work even on subliminal advertising. The Hidden Persuaders all came out in the 70s. Did it change anybody? The advertisements in England got worse in the 80s. They were so satanic. It was absolutely unbelievable. I had to watch it and decode them, so I know. Yeah, what happened to all that knowledge that came out in the 70s? Age of Manipulation and The Hidden Persuaders. And that guy, Vance Packard, wrote, I think, another 3 follow-ups. And then there was other books on the same subject. There was even movies with top stars like Lee Majors and Robert Mitchum featuring this. There was Columbo. There was an episode of Columbo. There was mainstream episodes showing the power of subliminal seduction and how negative it was, right? What happened? Everyone just rolled over and went to sleep. You know why? Because they're programmed. There's an old statement by Vernon Howard said, the man who's under psychic hypnosis is the one who doesn't believe that there is such a thing on this planet. Well, how do you untie that? You can't get them to believe it because they're under the hex. You point at the billboard like I used to do when I was dumb enough to do this. I go, look, can't you see it? And that martini advertisement or that Guinness advertisement. Do you not see that face, that skull or that evil thing? What? Well, it's like you're just talking about, dealing with these numbskulls, these chuckleheads. You're the dumbass. You're the dumbass because you know more. Wisdom alienates you. It makes you an instant outsider. And they only believe you when you're at the Spielberg level. You were talking about social media there. When I've got 1 million hits, I get another 1 million. Not because of the content, but the other 1 million knuckleheads saw, hey, he's got 1 million likes. Click. You think I want that? You think I give a shit about that? I want 2 likes if those people are sincere. And this is part of their spiritual quest that's brought them to my page, my work, whatever. The rest is, as you say, a form of programming, a form of infantilism. In fact, the internet has brought us more wisdom, more access to wisdom than anyone could ever imagine, and it's really only a few decades old. The question is, what is the masses made of it? If you really want freedom, if you really wanted freedom from slavery, you'd be free right now. And that doesn't even include all the great movies, from the 60s, all the Pink Floyds, the Moody Blues, the rock bands, who've already, my God, I'm not even including that. I'm just saying the straight internet from the mid-90s onwards, getting online. I was in Sweden in 2002 and people weren't even online then when I visited. So, this thing is extremely rare, extremely short-lived. But it's long enough there. It's been long enough there for if somebody really wanted absolute freedom, they'd know all about it. And masses today would have overthrown their government and at the very least, gone to an authentic libertarian model as sketched out by somebody like Ayn Rand and people like that. We don't see any of that. In fact, I see many of these groups having to close down. I see many of these groups saying, "Oh, we were meant to have our meeting, guys, this year in Philadelphia. It's cancelled. Either we've been blackballed by the venue because some arse has called up and blackballed us, or no, we're not even getting enough signups. Oh, but Bernie fucking Sanders and Jeremy bloody Corbyn and this other creature, this Cortez, shit, will turn out millions for that. Card-carrying Marxists are going to drag us back to the Cold War and worse. That we'll vote for. That we can do. That we know. That we can pull off. No problem there. So I'll sign on for that. But just even basic things that are out there, models that free you from federal taxation, that free you from federal control. Nobody wants to know. Or on the other side, you get the extreme lunatic anarchist types with no model except chaos. Freedom for all, whatever that means. Like the Prisoner series showed. Number 48, just go buck mad. That we'll sign on for as well. Well, what the fuck? What can you do? You just have to step back in the historical way and say, they're not ready yet. Let me focus my platform and message on those who have got this kind of eclectic brain. Their synapses are working. Yes, they can think 2 thoughts at the same time. They can digest, they can meditate, they can find the time to read and to contemplate. I've never wanted anything else in my whole career, and I still to this day, don't think in terms of beyond that. If something bigger comes in the mainstream, hey, great, I'll check it out when that time comes and make my decision then. But my God, there's already too much to preoccupy me, with my projects now that are coming out. Their top drawer stuff on the enslaved.com site. I'm just about to publish this very month 2 more programs, part 2 of my idealism. And that happens to be on the great philosopher George Berkeley. There's a whole section on Ireland's forgotten genius, George Berkeley. That'll be coming out at the end of the month. And then there's a thing on the tarot cards. These are top drawer works with over 30 years of study behind them. Every one of them, very, very deep works. We make that available, and it's really up to the other person, to see if this is palatable for them. It's absolutely freedom. It's absolutely their choice. That's what really freedom is. Not freedom in the streets, not the freedom of the mob. This is the freedom of the individual to choose what they want for themselves, what they want for their soul, what they want for their own spiritual development, and maybe as something, a legacy they can really leave to the generation that's coming, so they won't be entirely bereft of wisdom.
Yeah, well said, Michael. And that's all we can do, really. And it is the bottom line is, it's always been the case in this world that it's a free will planet, pretty much. You have the free will to decide how far you want to take things. And I suppose we should leave it there for this time anyway. But we should definitely have another one at some point and cover some other areas and go into some more detail, because we skip through so much and there's so much to say. And not just about the past, but about what's going on today. And like I was saying, I'll make sure that I usually, record an intro separately beforehand with all your websites as well, and usually in the outro too. But so anyway, I think we should leave it there for now. But Michael, thanks so much for your time. It's been really educational and inspirational to hear from you.
Well, I'd love to be on again. We can do it again anytime you want there, Emmett. You're a great host, and I hope to have you also to speak on your experience in Enslaved not too soon. If you're into that, we'd love to have your feedback, because we love people from different corners of the planet to come on to give their vision of what's happening in their corner of the world. So you're most welcome to come on Enslaved as well. But thanks you so much for today. I really appreciate it.
That's great. Yeah, you're very welcome, and that'll be my first official appearance as the Resolving Reality boss, or whatever you want to call it. So that would be cool. And anyway, we'll tee up another one soon, and we'll organize that later. And whenever you want me to be on Enslaved, just give me a shot, or give me a shout. But for now anyway, thanks, Michael Tsarion. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you very much, Emmett. We'll do it again.
You were listening to Resolving Reality Radio. That was my interview with Irish author Michael Tsarion. And make sure to visit michaeltsarion.com. That's Michael, TSARION.com. And also irishoriginsofcivilization.com to study into these very important subjects of history and ancient civilizations, the origins of control and religion, secret societies, the human psyche, and much, much more. Don't forget to visit our website, resolvingreality.com, for articles, podcasts, and video content. Find our various social media and audio platforms, including our Twitter profile, @ResolvingOr, both capital Ors. You can also find our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And visit the SoundCloud profile to download high-quality versions of the podcast episodes. We'll be back soon with episode 8 of Resolving Reality Radio. Until then, take care and enjoy Resolving Reality.